This week we'll be using layered dyes and watercolor to create this beautiful rose card. For the project, you will be needing Rose Flurries 3D dye by Altenew, as well as the Lil Inker Designs background die, and the Simon Says Stamp Thank You script die set. I'll also be using watercolors, and I will be using gold embossing powder. For more details on what I'm using, check out the description below. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to make the background. There are a lot of holes in this die, and it would kind of suck if you had to punch them all out by hand. So we'll be using something called release paper, which will make it easier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut my release paper to the same width as my die, just using scissors, nothing fancy there. And then I will be putting it in between the die and the paper itself. I'm just going to washi tape it onto the paper, and then I'm going to flip it around and washi tape it onto the back as well. Then I'm going to take my die and I'm going to do the same, but when you're washi taping it down, make sure the washi tape actually reaches the paper, because it will not stick to the release paper, because the release paper is not sticky. It won't adhere to it, which is the whole point. So just make sure that it goes from the die to the paper and you'll be good. Then go ahead and die cut it. Once you've taken the washi tape off, you can see how easily most of the little circles fall out. They get everywhere. So then I'm just going to use my little die brush, and I'm going to brush the rest of the circles out. Not all of the circles in the middle cut out, but it's okay. We're just going to cover them up with our decorations later. I've got a scrap of watercolor paper, and I'm going to begin to cut out my flowers. So I'm going to be painting these in later, which is why I'm going to cut them out of white. If you want to cut them out of colored cardstock, that's fine too. But I will only be cutting out the first layers, and the very final layer I will not be cutting out of watercolor paper, and instead I will cut out of regular paper later. So for each of the 5 flowers, just cut out the first layers, and then the very last layer, don't cut that one out. Now we're going to cut out the leaves. The leaves each only have 2 parts, so we're only going to cut out the first part. There are 3 leaves of identical shape and size, and I'm going to be cutting out all of them. Now that those are done, I'm going to set them aside, and instead we are going to work on the last layer of each. I've got a scrap of thin white cardstock, and I'm going to cut out the final piece of each flower and stem and leaf. On the bag, it has instructions for what order to put them in together, so the last piece in that is going to be the one that we're cutting out right now out of the white cardstock. For the small leaf covering, you're going to need to cut out 2 additional ones. I'm going to be watercoloring my flowers yellow. I've got sunshine yellow and daffodil yellow in my liquid watercolor. You can pick any color, but just make sure that you have 2 different shades. First, we're going to use the darker shade. For me, that is daffodil yellow if you're using the same color. And we're going to just take the concentrated version of that color. We're not going to add any water or anything. And we're just going to paint that onto the base of each of our flowers. So the first part, the whole part with no holes in it or anything, is going to be the base. So I'm just going to use that concentrated color and fill the whole thing in. Once it's partially dry, I'm going to use some more of that color, and I'm going to go over some more pieces of it to give it kind of more of a texture. It's not supposed to be perfectly all the same color. If I wanted to be all the same color, I would have used colored cardstock, so I really want to give it that texture by layering on the watercolor. For the next layer, I'm going to be using my sunshine yellow and my daffodil yellow for different parts. I'll show you why later. For now, we're going to add water to the daffodil yellow to make it lighter than the first layer. And we're not going to be using the small flower right now. We're going to be doing it with the lighter color later. For right now, I'm just going to fill all of them in and experiment with my color until I've got a lighter color than the first layer. Not a lot lighter, just a little bit, so it's a gradual lightness from the bottom to the top. Then I'm just going to fill them all in the same color. Since my smaller flower only has one more part left after this and the other ones all have two, I'm going to be using that sunshine yellow with water to make it even lighter. Now we're going to paint the final layer. I'm going to use the sunshine yellow and add water to that so that it's the lightest color out of all three layers. Then I'm just going to take my paintbrush and I'm going to fill the whole thing in all over again. For the plants, I'm going to be using olive green, and I found that it's best if you use 1 drop of that and 1 drop of water to make the perfect color. You don't have to do the same, you don't have to use the same color, but I thought that I really liked this color, and so I wanted to let you guys know in case you wanted to copy this color. Then you just mix it up and you go ahead and paint the whole thing. The next step is to emboss all of the top layers. I'm going to take some washi tape and I'm going to wrap it around my fingers, and so the sticky side is going to face up. So I'm just going to wrap it around a couple of times and then I'm going to cut it so I now have like a sticky band around my fingers. I'm going to flip it over so the back side is up and then I'm going to stick it to the band. Then I'm just going to cover it in the Versamark ink. This gives you a little bit more control and it also ensures that your hands won't get nearly as messy if you just did it with your hands. I'm going to heat emboss it, and because this piece is so small, it's going to blow away. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try a heat gun a small section, then I'm going to take some washi tape and tape it down, and then I'm going to continue until it's all done. So I'm taping it on the section that I've already finished, and then the whole thing is done and ready. Then I'm just going to repeat the same process for all the other top layers. Now we're going to put together our layers. This first one I'm going to do in regular time to demonstrate, and then I will be doing the rest of them in speed motion so you don't have to sit there and watch me glue and glue and glue. But basically I'm just going to take each layer and I'm going to use matte glue and I'm going to just glue it to the layer before it so that it layers up, stacks up, and creates a beautiful rose image. At this point you can see why we made each layer a lighter and lighter color, because once you put it all together it gives it this really cool ombre effect and it gives it some real depth and 3D-ness to it. And finally, the gold layer on top of the yellow just kind of accents it and gives it a softer sort of approach to giving it a little bit more embellishment. Then put all the pieces together in the correct order, and then you've got all your flowers and your stems made and ready for assembling. This next step is completely optional. These roses can shine all on their own without a sentiment, but I'd like mine to be a thank you card, so I've cut a scrap of watercolor paper to fit my die, and now I'm going to paint it using more liquid watercolors. I'm going to create the exact same color using the exact same amount of water, and then I'm just going to fill up the entire sheet of watercolor paper. Then I'm going to go ahead and cut it out. Finally, we're at the last stage. I'm going to use a tape runner to just tape on my background. Don't worry about it getting through the holes. Once you put it on, you really can't see it. So just don't worry about that and just put it where you need to so that it will stay. And just like that, we've got our background. I've already arranged everything how I want it to go, with the flowers near the top and the sentiment near the bottom, and I'm just going to take my glue and go ahead and glue on the sentiment first. It's really important to place everything so you know where it's going to go and how it's going to fit out. So I would recommend doing that first as well. To adhere the flowers, I'm going to add the bottom layer on with regular glue, and then the ones that will overlap them I'm going to use foam tape on so that there's no bending of the flowers. They're all very thick, so that's why we would use foam tape rather than just gluing it all down. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial on how to make a layered die rose card. This may have been one of my favorite cards to make. It just looks so elegant and beautiful, and I really love it. As always, don't forget to leave a like down below and subscribe for more tutorials. Stay crafty till next time!